We're starting now. So, hi everyone. My name is Rafael Norode. I'm a student from Microverse, and I'm from Nigeria. I've been in this program for about 3 months now, and today I'm hosting this webinar together with my co-host Ansan from Bangladesh. Ansan is going to give a short background about Microverse, just to show you what Microverse is and what we are about. Then I'll go ahead to introduce today's speaker to you guys. So, Hassan, can you give a short background on Microverse?
Thanks very much, Rafael. Microverse is a program for remote software developer that is completely free until you get a job. We have different courses in our program, ranging from Ruby, Ruby on Rails, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, and Redux. We go to school full time, usually from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. every day, and we each have remote coding partners. We learn by pair programming. Our partners help and support each other throughout the entire program until we both get a job. Every couple weeks, we organize lunch and learns like this one with host Jason. The goal is to inspire our students by giving them different perspectives from professional software developers who work in freelancing, open source, core companies, and work remotely. We have opened this lunch and learns also to the general public as we hope to inspire others as well. Asel, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, Hassan. That was great. Today we have Jason Lengstorf with us. First of all, Jason, thank you very much for giving us your time for this lunch and learn. It means a lot to us. Now I'm going to turn the lunch and learn over to you. But first of all, I'd like to tell everyone that if you want to ask your questions, there's a Q&A tab just beside the chat tab there. It's advised you drop your questions there so you can easily be identified. And if you have any questions with regards to Microverse, I think you should direct that to Lydia in a private chat to be better that way. So thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, let me share my screen again. And okay, hopefully everybody can see the screen. Let me know if you can't. And I will just kind of launch off here. So my name's Jason, and I want to talk to everybody about just kind of career advancement and something that's been really important to me in my own career advancement, which is having a sense of adventure about the way that we kind of explore and learn more things. So to tell this story, I have to start by talking a little bit about my mom. So this is my mom, this is Wendy, and she has probably a slightly different story. And so we're going to tell this story from her perspective. So with her story, it starts with me as a kid. So this is little baby me. And I am obviously adorable. And at this particular moment in time, my mom is pretty happy with me. She's very, I'm cute. I'm a good kid. I get great grades. Everybody's happy about this. But then when I get into high school, I become significantly less adorable. This is me. These are several of my phases of just poor choices and bad fashion. And I was troublesome. I caused a lot of problems. I jumped into a lot of bad things. And so, for me, this was a rough period in time. And for my mom, this was extremely rough. She was not a happy camper. But despite all of that, I did manage to graduate from school. So this is me with my graduation cap. I graduated high school. And so my mom was happy again. I mean, at the worst case scenario, at least I'm out of the house. And then you're supposed to go to college. So this is Harvard College. I definitely did not go to Harvard College. In fact, I didn't go to college at all. I instead joined a band. And this is me with my eyeliner and my tight jeans. And you can't see it under this hoodie, but I was definitely wearing a white belt. So as you can imagine, my mom was really unhappy about this. And her mood did not improve when I told her that I was going to go on tour with my band in a van like this one, and that I was going to sleep in this van, and that I was going to eat pretty much nothing but top ramen noodles for the foreseeable future. And I mean, really, at this point in time in my life, I probably had scurvy. So let's then fast forward to today, and this is me today. I have my career is going pretty well. Like I get invited to go speak at these events, and I'm pretty comfortable. I make a good living. I tend to be pretty happy with things. And as you can imagine, my mom is pretty happy with me again. And moms aren't supposed to choose favorite children, but if she had to pick, I'm sure it would be me. I'm kidding. But so I have to ask, how is this possible? Like, I didn't follow a career plan. I didn't follow the traditional path of go to high school, get good grades, go to college, get good grades, start a job, and advance through the career ladder. And if you think about it, what I really did, I did everything wrong. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about today. I want to dig into this idea of, like, what is a traditional career path, and what should we be thinking about? So the two concepts that I want to talk about today are seeking and wandering. So the first thing that I want to talk about is seeking. And seeking, in the context of this talk, is the pursuit of a defined goal. And so to put that in context, let's say you want to learn how to play the violin. If you want to be a great violinist, you would then say, I'm going to practice heavily to become a great violinist. And I'm going to practice, multiple hours every day. I'm going to do recitals. I'm going to get professional teachers. This is deliberate practice. If you've ever read Anders Ericsson's research, that's the term that he came up with for it, is deliberate practice. And this was popularized by Malcolm Gladwell into the concept of 10,000 hours. So to become an expert, the rule of thumb is that you need to have 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. And that's what makes you an expert. And this is very true. However, seeking is only limited to the things we know. We can't set a goal to become good at something that we don't know exists, right? So we can't deliberately practice something that isn't known to us. So if you think about, like, pre-industrial times, before we had factories and things like that, you would have a business. Your father and your grandfather would be blacksmiths, let's say. And so they would do ironwork, and they would make horseshoes and all these other things. And then when they got old, you would inherit the business and you would become a blacksmith, because that was what you knew. That was what was available to you. Today, we have the internet. And so we have the ability to learn more about what's out there, and we can broaden our horizons. But if we didn't know, if you were raised in a family where, everybody in your family has one business and that's the business that you'll inherit, then how do you learn that there are other career options out there? You can't practice knowing what you don't know. And so this is where the limitations of seeking come in. So another thing that seeking will do is it creates risk and fear. If you set a big goal, failure carries risk. If you say, my goal is to become a successful violinist, even if you practice, even if you do all of the work, you still might not become the best violinist in the world. You might not even be able to get like paid work as a violinist. It's a very competitive field. So setting that goal introduces a lot of risk. That is a scary thing. There's a possibility that you could fail. And that risk of failure can lead to playing it safe. So if you might start saying to yourself, well, if I might fail, then maybe it's better to not try at all. Maybe I should do something that I know I can do. And this could potentially lead you to something like having very high confidence in a very narrow discipline. So for example, if I am a student and I'm good at math, but I'm not good at writing, maybe I start to tell myself, well, I should be an accountant because that's math. And math is something I know I'm good at. And I don't love math, but it's something that I can be confident that I can finish, because you've created low confidence everywhere else. This is what's called a fixed mindset. And you may have heard that from, I believe, Carol Dweck. The fixed mindset is this internal monologue. It's a story that you tell yourself where you start to say, well, I'm not the kind of person who can do a thing. If you're, like I said, if you're good at math, you might start saying, well, I'm not the kind of person who can write engaging stories. I'm not the kind of person who can get up on stage and talk to a group. I'm not the kind of person who can learn to play an instrument. Whatever that story is, you start to repeat that. And in general, we tend to live the stories that we tell ourselves. If I'm repeating something to myself over and over and over again, I'll live up to my own expectations. And all of this kind of becomes fixed mindsets are built around this idea of failure. If we look at failure as an all is lost kind of situation, if I try something and I fail, that's it. I'm done. I've completely lost. The problem is that that's not actually how it works. Failure is not the end. Failure is just learning. Failure is a way to learn more about how the world works. So when you look at a situation, when you start to progress forward, you are able to say, I tried something and it didn't work. And now I have more information about how to move forward in the world. I know something that didn't work, which means that now I've narrowed down the options. So I'm more likely to choose something that will work. So that's learning. It's not failure. A good example of this is my agency. I had a web design agency called Copter Labs, and I wanted to build this out. I wanted to be successful. And in a lot of ways I did. I had clients. I made a good living. I had some prestige. People knew about my agency, and in a small vertical, we were considered, kind of the best agency for a certain type of website. But all of that success aside, we failed in a huge number of ways. I was not a great manager. I did a bad job of management. I wasn't good at managing the company finances. So the company was always carrying a little bit of debt. I had really unhealthy working patterns. And so I stressed myself out to the point where my health started to fail. At one point, I was so stressed that my beard fell out of my head. I had big bald patches all through my cheeks and chin. And ultimately, I ended up having to sell this company because I couldn't handle a lot of the ways that it was running. And you could look at that as a total failure. But ultimately, what I did was I was able to work a career for a while that made sense for me, and it made a living. And the things that I failed at taught me what I didn't want to do anymore. And it also taught me that failure wasn't the end. And that's a really important thing to take away, because failure is a way to learn resilience. Resilience is how we bounce back. And it's this idea that if something goes wrong, it's not hitting a wall where that means I will never succeed in this thing. It's, again, you're learning something that we need to try, but we have to build resilience. Resilience is, for most of us, not an innate skill. It's not something that where somebody says no and we go, okay, well, I'll try a different way. For most of us, when somebody says no, we just think, oh, okay, well, that's not for me then. And so we have to work on this skill of resilience. And there's a story that circulated a while back that I really liked about a man named Jason Lengstorf, who was so convinced that he needed to build his resilience that he set out to intentionally get rejected. And he would go and he would sit down and he would ask a stranger for something ridiculous. Can you give me a ride to a town 2 hours away? Can I borrow $100? Things that were not reasonable to ask. And he did that because he specifically wanted someone to tell him no. And this worked so well for him. He was so successful that he ended up making a game out of it. And this game is called rejection therapy. And the idea is that you will go and you will specifically go and try to get yourself rejected to help you build this muscle and learn that it's okay to get told no, that a failure is not the end. A failure is a step in a journey. And this is a really successful game. If this is something that you struggle with, a fear of someone saying no, I would highly recommend to do some version of this. You don't need to buy the game. You can just go and ask people questions that you know they'll say no to make sure that you are comfortable hearing that and realize that that no isn't the end. It doesn't mean that you have to stop. I did my own version of rejection therapy. I became a door-to-door vacuum cleaner salesman when I was young. It was the only job that I could find when I was in a band and I needed something quick. And this is a rough gig. If you've done door-to-door sales, you probably know how this feels. If you haven't done door-to-door sales, you're effectively walking into a stranger's house and asking them for money. And this is rough. So doors get slammed in your face. People yell at you. People insult you. They talk about you as a person, not the product you're selling. They judge your character. And so I had to learn to toughen up. I had to spend a lot of time getting over my own fear of rejection because I had to separate the job from my value as a human being. And so I learned a lot from this job. The most important thing that I learned is that I don't ever want to work in high pressure sales. It was not a fun place to be and not something that I enjoyed. The other thing that failure teaches us, though, is to rely on ourselves. We need to know if everything goes wrong, can I trust myself to be okay? Will I survive in the world on my own? And that type of resilience, that type of self-reliance is something that is absolutely foundational to anything else that we're going to do, because that self-sufficiency is the foundation of confidence. Being able to say, you know what, I don't know how, but I can do this. I can figure out a way to solve this problem. That's at the absolute core of success. We have to be willing to take risks and to try things and trust ourselves to get it right. And there's tact to that. There are things that we need to figure out, but ultimately this is kind of a rite of passage into becoming an adult. Losing that dependence on other people, on someone else to solve your problems. When you become the hero of your own story, that is when you become self-sufficient. And so we used to do this through rites of passage. You would see something like you would toss a kid out into the woods and say, hey, don't die. Just come back and do your best and keep yourself fed. And if you get back in 2 weeks, then congratulations, you're an adult. And if you don't, well, that's okay. You're going to be, you'll be culled from the herd. Clearly that's not possible for us anymore. We can't do that. That's kind of an unreasonable thing to think, but we still have rites of passage. And those rites of passage can be things like when you go off to college and live alone by yourself for the first time, or just when you move out of the house, even if you're not going to college. It could be something like getting your first job and not getting any financial support from your family anymore, and being in a position where you are now financially responsible for all of your own stuff. It could also be something like a big life event. Maybe you have a family member die, or my partner, when she got divorced, found herself on her own for the first time and had to solve all of these problems. For me, one of my rites of passage, and this was not a big one, but it was something that I learned, was I went to Alaska. And when I was in Alaska, I ended up in 10 days out in the middle of nowhere with no phone service, no internet connection or anything like that. And I stayed with friends who were very, living off the land kind of people. So we went out in the morning and we would go fishing. We would lay down crab traps. That's me with a crab there on the left. And then we would have to pull up those crab traps, kill the crabs, clean them, cook them, and then we made our dinner with something that we had literally gone out and caught and prepped ourselves that day. This was a big deal for me because I didn't know that I needed to know those things about myself, but they made me feel much more confident in my ability to exist in the world. Prior to this, I would have joked that I was an indoor pet and that I was not capable of really functioning out in the world on my own. If I had to go hunt and gather, I would clearly starve to death. But while I wasn't completely on my own here, I did learn that the skills that I needed are available to me and I could figure them out if I needed to. And that meant a lot to me internally. It made me feel more confident. So that kind of leads me to the next thing. I didn't know that knowledge was going to make me feel more confident. And I didn't know that it was going to help me move forward in any way. But because I was out there doing something weird, something that didn't make sense for me, I learned something new. And that brings me to the second concept, which is wandering. Wandering is, for the purposes of this talk, undirected exploration. It's the idea of being curious, of looking for something that isn't related to the thing that you need to know right now. It's the idea of learning for fun. So this could be hobbies, it could be play. It's ultimately built toward the idea that you just want to realize what the possibilities are. There's so much information in the world. There's so many things to learn. What if you just want to, go deeper and see what else is out there. And this is how we discover new concepts and ideas. This is how we learn about new paths. This is a very kind of undirected and seemingly chaotic way. And for that reason, a lot of times people who wander get considered to be loafers or lazy. It's wandering is considered like a leisure activity. It's something that you do when you don't have anything to work on, when you're not trying to advance as a human. We call it killing time. We consider, wandering to be not productive, or we call hobbies distractions. We consider taking time to learn something new as procrastination. And those sorts of things are not particularly valuable outlooks on this, because ultimately wandering is the way that we learn. When we're children, wandering is a critical part of our development. We play with toys, we pursue useless things, we have conversations about everything and nothing. We ask the question why thousands of times, and we never need that information. It's never critical to us existing. Asking why the sky is blue, or why water is wet, or why a pump works the way that it works, those aren't things that are necessarily critical to our advancement into adulthood, but they make us more well-rounded. We can connect more dots because we wander and we learn all of these concepts. This effectively gives us this knowledge that shows us that there are doors that we can walk through. And those doors are not always visible. If we never wander, we might not realize those doors exist in the first place. So we need at least some wandering to understand what our options are. If we don't see those options, like if I, as a child, never learn that computers are programmable, or if I never learn that, say, dolphins are animals that, need trainers, maybe I never learn that I'm interested in computer programming or marine biology. Maybe I never get interested in chemistry, and I never want to go study like pharmaceuticals or whatever it is that ends up being an interest for me. We have to have that undirected wandering to become aware of possibilities. So if we don't do that, what ends up happening is the family business thing. You don't know that there are other options. And so critical decisions about what you become as you grow up get made by default or by other people. And now it's totally acceptable to go into the family business. If you know your options and you decide that's what you want to do, that's absolutely what you should do. I'm not saying that that's not a good idea. What I'm saying, though, is that you don't necessarily want to find yourself in a position where you're moving by default because you don't know what to do. And so you let decisions happen for you. Every decision ideally is made with knowledge. You know what you're looking at. And if you've played video games, you may recognize this kind of concept as like a world building game, where when you start, you can see a little square of the map, but most of the map is hidden from you. And unless you wander around, you'll never know what else is on that map. You need to take your little character and walk to different parts of the map to see what's available there. And in this little square of map, I do have, we can see we've got some resources, we've got some things that we can do, but ultimately we can't advance to the higher levels of the game without going further and seeing more of what's available. Each possibility that we see in our lives, each thing that we explore, that opens up a door. And each of those doors gives us a way to get to more doors. This is a concept that Stephen Johnson calls the adjacent possible. And what it means is that, let's say you want to invent bread. If you have never seen flour or an oven, you can't just invent bread. First, you have to learn about flour. You have to learn about wheat. You have to learn about agriculture or how to spot edible plants. All of these different small pieces of technology have to get discovered in succession in order to lead to something new. It's kind of like the idea of the internet. When the internet was invented, the first thing that we did was we put up a couple little home pages to say, hey, here's, maybe I want to send you a document. And then we figured out how to do more. We figured out how to make them interactive. We figured out how to do things like MySpace, which was where social networks started to take off, or even GeoCities before that with things like web rings. And then we iterated on that. We saw Facebook, we're seeing Twitter, we're seeing Snapchat and Instagram, and all of these new social platforms that are building on the possibilities created by their prior art. We couldn't have just invented the internet and immediately created, TikTok. It's not a possibility. There were too many intermediate steps. It's too far of a jump. That's like going from, the Wright brothers' first flight with their propeller airplane straight to jet fuel or space flight. There are too many intermediate steps. It's too big a jump. So we have to keep wandering to see where these doors are, because there are so many doors, and we need to go through them in order to see what lies beyond them. And so, this is the idea that, like, here's a good example. One of the best examples of the adjacent possible is cooking. So when we cook our food, it requires significantly less energy to digest, which means that we get more energy from each bite of food that we consume. That extra energy can be used by our brains. And so when we as humans discovered cooking, that's what opened the door for our brains to evolve to the size that they are today. So effectively, like, learning to cook was the door that allowed us to evolve into having abstract thought. And having abstract thought was the door that led to everything that makes us human: philosophy, technology, all of that. And so, this is kind of the idea of, like, when somebody says you have to crawl before you can run, that's what we're talking about. You have to walk through the adjacent possible and learn about different things, and then build on those skills. And they're going to connect in different ways. If you think about, like, learning to talk allows you to say a sentence, but it also creates the opportunity for humor. It creates the opportunity for lies. It creates the opportunity for, hurting someone without any physical violence. All of these things that maybe weren't intended consequences, but because we learned one thing, other doors opened. And then we have to explore those doors to learn whether or not we should actually go through them, whether or not it's something that we want to do. And that's why you see kids starting to, they learn to talk, and then they learn to lie, and then they lie a bunch, and then they stop over time. Hopefully they learn that it's not a good way to move forward. So they explore it, and then they leave it behind because it's not a good thing for them, and they move on to something better. And what I like about this is that wandering is a way that we build confidence. Every time that you walk through a small door, if I decide that I'm going to do a puzzle, and I get a toddler's puzzle that's got 8 pieces, I'm probably going to be able to put that together. So I put it together, and then I go, okay, I can solve that puzzle. Maybe I can do the one with 20 pieces, and then you solve that one. And then maybe I'll try the one with 100 or 500 or 1,000. And maybe you don't start with the big thing. You start with a small success. And this is where we get from the idea of a fixed mindset, where you would say, oh, I've solved this one thing. Maybe I'm only good at this thing. As you get more and more successes, as you wander further and further, you start to change that story. And so that story then becomes, I've figured out lots of little things. I can probably continue to figure out other things. I have a pattern of solving problems when I'm presented with new information. And so I can trust myself to walk into an unknown scenario and probably do okay. I also think that wandering reduces our risk. A lot of risks aren't actually risks. They're just a lack of information. So if I make a bad investment, that bad investment probably isn't because it's always risky. It's because I didn't have enough information to make a good decision about whether or not to make that investment. So as we wander, we open up a lot of doors. We start to broaden our knowledge, and we start to learn little things that help us inform our decision making, which means that we're ultimately reducing that risk. We're increasing our confidence in our decisions, because a lot of that risk isn't actually risky if we have the information to make an informed decision. You can think about it as kind of a way of building connections. Our subconscious is extraordinarily good at finding new connections between ideas. So what we're trying to do is gather a bunch of information and then see how it connects. It's this idea of the game where you have blocks, and you have a square block and a square hole, and a circular block and a circular hole. And by starting to explore as an infant, you put those together and you start to learn, oh, if I have a block shaped like this and I put it into a hole shaped like this, it will fit through. And if I don't, it won't. And as we get older, those connections become much more abstract and complex, but the idea is the same. We look at information that's available to us, we experiment with it, we roll it around in our brains, and we start to make connections. And our subconscious is extraordinarily good at this. But the only way that our subconscious can work is if we shut off the conscious part of our brains. So we need that disconnect. We can't work through complex problems. We need to take breaks. We need that time to wander, to have a hobby, something that gets us away from the core thing so that our subconscious can roll it around and make those new connections. That's why one of the best ways to solve a problem is to go take a walk. It's why you solve problems in the shower or when you're dreaming. There are these, there's an active part of your brain, so call it the administrative part of your brain, that's more of a director. It's where you're saying, I'm going to think about this, and I'm going to think about this, and I'm going to think about this. Whenever that part of your brain is engaged, the subconscious part of your mind can't be engaged. It's switched off. So when you turn off the executive part of your brain, the part that's telling you what to think about, then that subconscious just starts to say, well, I had this in my head. I saw this thing. How do those fit together? Oh, here's a connection. And then you have that aha moment where you realize, oh, this thing that I wasn't thinking about, it turns out that makes a lot of sense. So this is a really important part that really often gets overlooked, especially in tech. We have this idea of hustle and grind where we need to stay active, work 90 hours a week, and just never stop working. And that actually makes us worse at our jobs. We need that disconnect. We should be taking walks. We should be taking weekends. We should be taking vacations, because that's where these new and novel connections get made. That's where we really start to see the way that the world connects. And we get to apply our unique experience to that. So wandering gives us different perspectives. What the thing that I think is really interesting is that you're able to, despite the fact that we all have access to the same information, we start to get different information. Each one of us gains access to a different collection of information, and that gives us a unique perspective. So as an example, my partner and I, Marissa, we spent 2014 to 2017 living in Airbnbs in different parts of the world. So this is a photo of us in Barcelona, Spain. And one of the things about traveling that was amazing is that we were able to take the exact same selfie in different parts of the world and see all of these different places while taking the exact same photo. And so all of this wandering taught us things that we didn't think we'd ever need to know: how to manage taxes, how to navigate these complex international visa laws, travel hacks for how to travel with less luggage and faster and more effectively, how to speak a little bit of different languages. I don't speak any language fluently other than English, but I have enough of other languages to start to be able to connect some dots. I learned so much about food. And most importantly, I became extraordinarily empathetic, especially compared to where I used to be. Young me didn't have a lot of empathy for people. I would hear their story and I would say, oh, well, you should have worked harder. And that's not a productive way to look at things. When I got out into the world and saw the way that the world works outside of my bubble, I started to understand that situations are different for different people. And that allowed me to think about problems in a way that was designed for everyone and not for me. And it also taught me to ask for feedback from people who weren't me, so that I could understand where my blind spots were and make sure that I wasn't inadvertently doing something that hurt other people. So a lot of people tend to have this type of internal monologue. If you look at a new opportunity, if you look at something that is maybe not your given career, you will respond to it with something like, I can't do that. It doesn't help me reach my goals. I'm wasting my time. Or maybe you're saying, oh, I've wasted years in the wrong career. And that's because we start out with this idea that moving between that any skill set is non-transferable. We start to look at it as, well, if I'm going to move from one career to another, only a very minor amount of the things that I do are actually going to transfer to the new career. And I challenge that, because what I found is, the way that we look at it is, okay, well, how does being a pastor help you prepare for a career in web development? Or how does human resources management help you become a product manager? I mean, you would assume there's no overlap. Those are completely different careers, right? So if somebody switches from one to the other, that would mean all of that time is wasted, right? But that's not actually how it works. If you become a pastor, like my friend Kyle Shevlin did, you learn how to sell ideas, how to listen, how to empathize, how to persuade people and disagree respectfully. And those types of skills, if you don't think that's 90% of what development is, we should have a different talk, because it is. Development is a little bit technical and mostly people. And in human resources, my partner Marissa learned how to understand complex human systems, how to align completely unrelated motivations to make sure people were moving in the same direction. And again, that's most of what product management is. And so the vast majority of their skills transferred. They didn't in both cases. And in most cases, you'll find that a lot of the things that you learned in one career or for one skill end up being applicable in different ways, or they gave you a foundation that allows you to quickly pick up whatever the new skills are that you need. Another thing that I hear people say a lot, my mom does this all the time, is I'll tell her that she should try something, and she's, oh, I'm not like that. I don't have natural talent. I really dislike this. The idea that you either are or are not something is such a fixed approach to the world. And it says, oh, well, I'm limited by something that I can't control. And I really don't like that. I believe that talent is a muscle. We aren't born knowing how to code or how to, build a house or speak 3 languages. Honestly, we're not even born knowing not to touch a hot burner. We have to slap our hand on it and get burned to learn that that's a dumb thing to do. And so, we have to learn from experience, and that experience needs to be broad so that we know what's available. And then we have to do the work. We have to practice. So as an example of this, there's a psychologist or a scientist named Laszlo Polgar, and he wanted to prove that practice and not talent is what makes experts. So he had 3 daughters. His daughters' names were Susan, Sophia, and Judith. He wanted to make all of them into chess masters. So when they turned 5, each one of them, as they turned 5, he started teaching them to play chess. Now, Laszlo himself is not a professional chess player. He's just a hobbyist. He can play, but he's not going to be a hero here. But he did deliberate practice with his daughters every day, starting from when they were 5, and each of them became a top-rated player. So Susan was the top-rated female chess player in the world by the time she was 14 years old. Sophia is the 5th greatest chess performance of all time. One of her games was rated that way. And Judith is the youngest ever chess grandmaster of all time, or at least at the time that I wrote this research or read this research. And all of that is from somebody who is not a professional chess player. It's just somebody who was interested and wanted to teach their children how to do a thing. So deliberate practice is what did that. There was no innate chess playing ability in these 3 girls. They just practiced. And Laszlo says, people for some reason don't want to believe this. They seem to think that excellence is only open to others and not to themselves. And that just doesn't, that's such a sad way to look at the world. You have every bit of opportunity. The only difference between you and somebody who is an astronaut or a rocket scientist or a top athlete is time and practice. Obviously with athletics, there are a few other physical factors there, but ultimately, if you want to do a what would be considered a white collar job or a technical job, you can learn that information. You can put in the work and do the practice to gain what you need to get where you want to go. And so you just have to believe, you have to be open to the idea that you are not inherently limited. You are limited by your ability to do the work and to practice. And that can be controlled by things that aren't necessarily under your control. Not everybody has the luxury to be able to practice chess for hours every day. And so, if you are working multiple jobs, if you're taking care of a family, if you've got, different economic or just life restrictions that prevent you from doing that, that's not your fault. That's not you being lazy. Obviously, you have to deal with the world that you live in, and those limitations are very real. But we do have the potential, right? So we may not be able to live up to our full potential based on whatever environmental circumstances, but that doesn't mean that we can't do some of it. that we can't make progress and get further than we are today. And the idea that we should just say, oh, well, that's not for me, I'll never be that, and then never try, that's heartbreaking. So let's take this and let's think about it from the perspective of that story that I told about me doing everything wrong. So here's me. I'm a troubled kid, didn't do great in school, didn't go to college. I was living in a van trying to become a rock star. And somehow I went from there to here, where I have a good career and people seem to value the skills that I have. And, I'm working in tech and not in music. So how did that happen? How did that transition take place? Let's look at it from the context of seeking and wandering. So I was failing constantly. I was always learning new things. I had bad shows. We did bad planning and had to scramble or miss something out. I had bad merchandise that we didn't talk to anybody about, and we designed something that nobody wanted. So we spent a bunch of money on t-shirts that never sold. I had to learn to depend on myself. I didn't have any help. The band didn't make a lot of money, so we didn't have people to help us design merch. We didn't have people to build us a website, to send a newsletter, to book our tour, to negotiate with the people at the venues for our gas money. Each of those things was something that I just had to learn to do. And I wasn't good at it at first, but I practiced, and we were playing 200 shows a year. So I needed to get good at that very quickly. And through those, I started learning all these skills. And I didn't have a source of income. My parents weren't sending me money. They thought I was making terrible decisions. So I had to figure out how to take care of myself. And I learned resilience. We took a video of every show that we played and had to watch ourselves. And we weren't a great band. So we had to watch ourselves be terrible on stage night after night after night to learn which way we could improve, how we could make some adjustment that would make our show better. I had to cold call venues who had no idea who we were in cities that we had never been to and ask them to give us their space to play a show. And so we got turned down or just completely ignored often. I had to reach out to strangers and ask them to hang up posters for our shows. I had to convince people to buy our merchandise and ask them for permission to sleep on their floor. All of these things were things that we regularly got turned down for. So I had to learn how to bounce back from those no's, from being told that I wasn't going to be able to do that. And I also got lots of practice. As we were doing this, we needed a lot of design. So I ended up learning a lot of Photoshop. I got a lot of practice designing tour posters and t-shirts and things like that. We needed to customize our MySpace. We needed to customize our personal website. So I kept rebuilding that and practiced and practiced and practiced. I ended up learning HTML and CSS and PHP, Flash back when it was still a valid thing. I started learning JavaScript. I also learned management. I had to get the band to different places on time. I had to track the money that we had versus the money that we owed. I had to order and sell our merch and coordinate that. I had to run social media programs in the street team. Each of those things was a lot of work and something that I didn't inherently know how to do or think that I was really qualified to do. We just didn't have a choice. And I just kept doing it. It turned out that I kind of enjoyed the design and the web stuff. So I just kept redesigning things, kept redesigning our website. And through doing that, I learned options. I started to realize what was possible, and I started to realize what I enjoyed. So when I got to the end of the band, when the band failed, I realized there was a list of things that I really liked to do, and there was a list of things that I didn't. So when I started looking at what was next for me, I had a list of things to start looking for. And what I knew I wanted to do next was start moving into tech, because as I learned, I wasn't a great musician, but I was pretty good at design and development. And when I switched over, it turns out that the overlap was huge. The only skill that I didn't need when I moved over to freelance web design was music. I didn't need to play music anymore, but I absolutely needed to design things. I needed to talk to people, needed to negotiate with clients. I needed to book projects. All of those skills that I had learned in the band, they were still applicable in a slightly different way. And I think that makes a good point, because we need both seeking and wandering. I was wandering when I joined the band, and I was wandering when I ended up taking on the design and the development and the negotiation and the management, but I was seeking when I tried to get better at them, when I kept rebuilding that site, when I kept booking shows, when I kept going on the road. every single time that was a rep, that was practice. And I was doing it deliberately because I really wanted that band to make it. And so when it didn't make it, I still had the practice. I just wasn't going to use it for what I originally thought. And that was wandering. I learned about a new opportunity by seeking one goal. So I think we want to seek intelligently. You should have a goal in mind and you should be working toward it. But you also want to make sure that the goals are, kind of shorter and more manageable. So you want to seek for something that is in the immediate future. It's a realistic goal, and ideally break it up into a short period of time. It should be something that you can accomplish in weeks or months, not years. Because otherwise what happens is that your rewards are all in the future. You don't want to work your whole life for something that you'll never realize until you die or retire. That's not a rewarding way to live. And it's, the ultimate goal of being alive is to live a good life. And if you live your whole life for a future that may or may not materialize, that can feel very hopeless and unrewarding. And it also makes your target feel impossible, right? So one of the things that I like to do is I like to take my goals and I like to make them much smaller. And I use a technique that I call the ATOM technique, which is an acronym. And it's short for make your goals actionable, timely, ownable, and measurable. And what that means is that the thing is something that can be worked on right now. If it's something that you have to do other things to get to first, like I can't go work on Wall Street right now. I couldn't make that a to-do item. I would need to first learn a bunch about finance. I would need to learn how to do any of that. There's so many things that I would need to know before I could actually make this choice. It needs to be timely, which means it has a short duration. So if I want to, I can't say I'm going to be a millionaire. That might be a long-term goal, something that I aspire to be, but that's not an action item. I can't say, I can't like go out and do work to become a millionaire. I have to do work to achieve a goal where an outcome might be that I become a millionaire. So instead I need to make it something, time bound. I'm going to grow my revenue this quarter by 10%. And then I have to think about what that means. I'm going to, find one extra client. I'm going to charge 10% extra for my services. I'm going, whatever. There's something that you can do that makes it timely so you can actually see what's happening. It has to be ownable. Only one person can own it. If more than one person owns a problem, then chances are it becomes something that doesn't get done because the blame gets shifted around and ultimately nobody pursues it. And it has to be measurable. How can you tell when it's done? And what I like to do is I like to try to define my goals in such a way that it has a yes or no answer. There's no, it depends. There's no, well, kind of. It has to be either yes or no. Did I increase my sales by 10%? Yes or no. I mean, there's no, you can't fudge that number. You either did or you didn't. And so I like those types of goals because they're short and I know whether or not I'm making that progress. So I can start to measure. So I would highly recommend kind of taking that sort of approach to your seeking to make sure that when you're seeking a goal, that goal doesn't become kind of a specter that lives in the future somewhere that you're not really sure if or how you're going to attain it. And then with wandering, you want to wander often, but you need to make sure that you're taking action with that. You should set aside time to explore new ideas. You should make sure that you're following through and doing the work. Because if you're just gathering information, that can become a form of paralysis or procrastination where you're learning in lieu of taking action. So instead, you want to make sure that you are wandering and then trying things so that you can build those small successes. That's where the confidence and the momentum come from. So this is a picture of my family at what we call our baking day. And so this is a low risk, low time commitment. It's one day. And it's something that we don't normally do. We get together as a family and we bake a bunch of different things. We do cookies and breads and all sorts of stuff that's not really what we're good at. Well, my partner Marissa is a very good baker, but everybody else, it's just something that we do every once in a while. And then I try to do things like that all the time. I'll go snorkeling. I'll read a book about physics. I'll take a dance class. I'm taking salsa lessons right now on Mondays. Maybe I'll go hike up into the woods. And this is a picture of me and some friends up in the Slovenian Alps. And while I'm out there doing that, I'm kind of unplugged from the rest of my work. I'm learning something. I'm doing something. But ultimately, my subconscious is just plugged in, and I'm thinking about my work in the background. And that allows me to make new connections about what I want to be and do going forward. So, spend that time in nature, go take walks, be bored, turn off your screens. Don't look at your phone when you're outside. Don't do work. Just have a minute to sit around and be disconnected. That's really important. And most of all, just be curious. The world is such a fascinating place. And if you take the time to look at it and wander around and see what's out there, there's no limit to what you're capable of accomplishing. Thank you very much for watching. And I think now we're going to jump into some questions here. So let's see. There were a handful of questions. Is there a way that you want to do this, Raphael?
Operational.
Here's
now we are back in. Now we are going to move on to the Q&A. I'm going to ask a few questions. And first question is from Darshan. He wants to know, what would you suggest to someone who has short attention span?
There are some techniques like the Pomodoro, where you set a timer for 25 minutes to focus on something with a built-in break. That's a good way to make sure that your attention span is, you're only working for 25 minutes so you can focus down. And the breaks allow you to get up, walk around, check Twitter, do whatever it is that you want to do, knowing that that's a built-in break so that you can come back and then do your next 25 minutes. You should experiment with what the right length of time is for you. I find for me, 90 minutes is about the right amount of time because that's enough for me to get into the flow of working on a development project. My partner does 30 minutes. A friend of mine does 60. There's not really a right or wrong answer there. You should just experiment and try and see what the right amount of time is. But a timer is extraordinarily helpful if you have trouble focusing.
Okay, next question is from Yan. I applied to many junior developer jobs and most of the time just got rejected emails. Some scheduled and with me, but before I could get to the technical interview phase, I always failed the general interview, mostly with HR. I think this is because I don't feel confident and showed it because I don't have prior experience in IT. Plus, I don't actually trust my coding skill, especially algorithm. How can I not get discouraged and keep at it? And what can I improve? Yes.
I think there are some books that you can read. There's one called Cracking the Coding Interview that has algorithm practice problems that will teach how to do those sorts of things to boost your confidence there. The best way that I've learned, though, is to just keep building things. Build your personal website, rebuild it, build websites for, whatever, a just for fun project that is going to cause you to learn something new, and always find a way to push yourself. I like to take on projects that are what I know plus about 10% new information. And that way, it's not going to be so much that I feel discouraged and don't finish, but it's always pushing me a little bit further forward. And that was my rule in selling client projects. That was my rule in taking on personal projects. And I found that was very, very helpful for me in always moving forward a little bit without feeling overwhelmed. In terms of the interviews themselves, confidence is a very hard thing to build. And what I would recommend, if you can do it, is find someone to do mock interviews with you so that the interview itself doesn't make you nervous. Because a lot of times it's not your ability, it's your interviewing ability, which is a completely different skill set. So if you can practice that and learn how to answer questions without umming and awing or sounding self-conscious, that will really go a long ways in getting you to the technical interview so that you can show off what you actually know.
Okay, next is question from Osman. He's asking, how long did you take to learn the foundation of web technology, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and also what were your challenge and how did you overcome them?
I feel like I'm still learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I don't think that there's. I think it's a progression. It's something that you're going to continue to learn throughout your career. I think it took me a few years. And again, I was doing this as part of being in a band, so I wasn't spending my full time on it. So I don't know that my experience is really directly transferable here. But for me, it was a couple years of trying to build sites and rebuilding them and reading documentation as I went. And that made me feel confident enough to offer it professionally. I think that that can be significantly accelerated. Had that been the only thing that I worked on, and had I been doing deliberate practice to level up my HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, I think I would have learned a lot faster. As a good example, I, at one point, switched from being a primarily WordPress developer to doing mostly React projects, and I felt like I wanted to level up my React skills. And so to do that, I wanted to learn more about JavaScript itself. And I did that by reading a couple books. I read a functional programming book called, what was it? It's like Dr. Boolean's something functional programming. And then I read You Don't Know JS by Kyle Simpson, and a handful of articles that were just introductions to kind of the underlying structures of JavaScript. And I did a bunch of exercises. I did this over the course of a month or so. And by the end of it, I wasn't an expert by any means, but I knew enough that when I saw terms, I knew what to Google to find an answer. And sometimes I think that that's the most important thing, is learning. You need to build a context for what you're trying to do. You don't necessarily need to have the answer, but you need to have enough context to be able to search for an answer. I don't know if that directly answers the question, but that's the best I got.
Okay, next question is from Baladev. Is entering the world of video games really difficult?
I don't work in video games, so I don't know that I can answer that directly. My anecdotal experience is that it is not hard to get a job in video games, but it is hard to get a good job, because a lot of the companies are fairly tough on their workers. That's not something that I can validate from personal experience. It's just something that I've seen written about and heard my friends talk about in the gaming industry.
Okay, and Pon Muthu Salvan is asking, what is your biggest fear you wanted to overcome?
I think the biggest fear that I needed to overcome was trying to work on a team and bring people with me. So I've always felt relatively confident in my ability to solve individual problems. If you hand me a code sample and say I need it to do a thing, I can Google that. I can learn how to do that problem, and I'm fairly good at learning like that. But if you told me that I needed to walk into a room full of people and convince all of them to follow a given plan and stick to that plan without fighting or deviating or saying they're not going to do it, that's extremely challenging, and it's not something that it's not a talent that I was born with. It's something that I had to learn through a lot of practice and study. So most of my learning, my adult kind of leveling up on skills is actually on things like engineering management and leadership and communication, far more than it is on technical things, because the technical things, I feel like I'm good at self-directing my learning. Leadership and communication, I'm absolutely not a natural. So I had to study very hard to learn what little skills I have. And I am always seeking feedback to try to get better at it, because I still feel like there are a lot of places where I'm not as strong as I could be. And I always worry that in that scenario, I could be misleading the team. And misleading a group of people is significantly worse than making a mistake individually, because if I screw up, it's on me, it's my problem, I can deal with that. If I make a decision that screws you up, I could cause a lot of problems for you that way.
Okay, that's all we have today. Rafael.
Okay, I have one more question for Jason though. I'm sorry guys, I had internet issues. So Jason, how would you advise someone that's already in tech? In my opinion, I think it's very difficult to transition within an industry as opposed to transition from another industry to understand. So let's say someone is a web developer and feels like he or she wants to become a software developer. Yeah, but I think it's difficult making that leap. How would you know that you're ready to be a software developer, or probably an advocate, a developer advocate, or something like that, an engineer also?
I don't know that anyone will ever feel ready. I think I've read a lot about kind of confidence in interviewing and applying for jobs, and the patterns that I've seen as well are that in situations where you find you're asking someone to apply for a job, most of the time you don't see people apply unless they feel like they know every single thing on that list. And so excuse me, what I would recommend is try to understand what the requirements are for that job, and then set projects for yourself to try it, and make sure that it doesn't feel completely foreign to you. So if you are a web developer and you wanted to start working on applications in, say, Java or something, build a Java app and go through some tutorials and learn how that works. If you wanted to work in something else, something deeper in the stack, you can do that as well. Just find a project that you can build, make it small enough that you know for sure you can finish it, and start to get a feel for how that language works. And as soon as what I hope you'll find is that a lot of the skills that you've learned in web development are going to transfer to other areas of development. You know, under the hood, a lot of these skills are the same. It's just applied in different ways. The way that you loop through something, or the way that you manipulate data, that's going to be true in almost every programming language. The only difference is the exact syntax, but the concepts, the underlying concepts, are the same. So as you start to do that, I would highly recommend look for the familiarity, and then jump when you feel like you're about 80% ready, and start applying for those jobs. Because what people should be hiring for, and what good companies will hire for, is your potential to grow into a role, and they'll make sure that you are capable of doing what needs to be done, obviously, but they should be hiring for what you're capable of becoming as well. And so once you feel like you're close, once you feel like you are able to do the bare necessity of the job, you should start applying then, and start asking, if you don't get the job, what was it that I needed to know more about, and then start seeking those types of skills that'll help you get where you want to go. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does. Anyway, thank you very much, Jason, for coming to give us this wisdom today. We really appreciate it. And I think this is all the time we have, especially over the time. So, do you have any last words of advice to the attendees, all of us?
Take advantage of your network. We have a world that is completely flattened by places like Twitter, by global webinars like these, and making connections with people in other parts of the world, making connections with other developers, is often going to be your best path toward making a job. So seek out really genuine connections. Try to be friendly and helpful and useful to people elsewhere in the community, because they will recognize that, and they will remember when they start looking for new developers. So yeah, don't underestimate a network.
All right. Thank you very much. And to everyone,
Thanks for having
I hope
me.
you join us next time. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, guys. That's all we have for today. Bye,
Thank you.
Jason.
Thank you, Jason.